The morning sun streamed through the towering windows of the Metropolitan Courthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors as Victoria Whitmore made her entrance like a reality TV star, stepping onto a red carpet. Her Louboutin heels, worth more than a bailiff's monthly salary, clicked against the pristine floor, sending echoes through the hushed corridor, while a small army of paparazzi scrambled to capture her practiced pout and perfectly styled platinum blonde hair. Behind her walked Harrison Whitmore, the billionaire CEO of Whitmore Industries, his usually commanding presence now tinged with an unfamiliar nervousness as he adjusted his Armani tie for the 100th time that morning. His daughter's latest scandal had already cost the company millions in dropped contracts, but Victoria seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation as she paused to take a selfie against the courthouse's ornate wooden doors. The gallery of Courtroom 7A was already packed with spectators, reporters, and curious law students who had lined up since dawn to witness what the media had dubbed the restaurant racist rampage case. Victoria sauntered down the center aisle as if it were a fashion show runway, her designer outfit carefully chosen to project an image of innocent sophistication. The dove gray Alexander McQueen suit probably cost more than most people in the room earned in a month. Judge Marcus Chen sat behind his imposing bench, his weathered hands folded carefully as he observed the spectacle unfolding before him. 40 years on the bench had taught him to read people like books, and everything about Victoria Whitmore, from her dismissive glance at the court officers to the way she flicked imaginary dust from her sleeve, screamed of someone who had never faced real consequences in her life. The young socialite settled into the defendant's chair with the air of someone choosing a seat at an exclusive restaurant, pulling out her phone to check her Instagram followers, which had surprisingly doubled since the incident. Her attorney, Benjamin Sterling Dew of the prestigious Sterling and Maxwell firm, attempted to confiscate the device, but Victoria swatted his hand away with an irritated huff while whispering something that made the seasoned lawyer wince. Harrison Whitmore took his seat in the front row, his presence a reminder of the family's deep connections to this very courthouse. The Whitmore name was literally carved into the marble entrance, commemorating generations of donations and influence that had shaped the city's legal landscape. But as he caught Judge Chen's steady gaze, he felt an unfamiliar sensation of doubt. The courtroom fell into an expectant hush as Judge Chen prepared to begin the proceedings, but Victoria continued tapping away at her phone, her long manicured nails creating a distinct clicking sound that seemed to echo off the mahogany walls. Several jury candidates shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they observed her behavior, while the young waitress she had allegedly attacked, Ming Liu, sat quietly in the back row, her burnt face still bearing the faint scars of their encounter. Victoria paused her social media updates just long enough to shoot a contemptuous glance at Ming Liu before turning to her father and loudly whispering, "Daddy, just buy her a new face and let's get this over with. I have a lunch reservation at Le Cirque." The whisper carried through the silent courtroom, causing several gasps and making Harrison Whitmore close his eyes in resignation. Judge Chen removed his glasses with deliberate slowness, his expression unreadable, as he observed the young woman before him, while Victoria took another selfie, this time with the judge's bench in the background, and added the caption, "Justice is like so boring," with 3 crying laughing emojis, completely unaware that her next social media update would be a mugshot. The ancient courtroom projector hummed to life, casting its harsh fluorescent glow across the otherwise dim chamber as Assistant District Attorney Sarah Martinez approached the evidence table with measured steps, her dark eyes fixed on Victoria, who was now applying a fresh coat of lip gloss using her phone's front camera. The ADA had spent 15 years prosecuting cases, but something about this entitled young woman made her blood boil in a way few defendants ever had. Officer James Wilson took the stand, his crisp blue uniform a stark contrast to the casual way Victoria slouched in her chair as he began describing the security footage from Golden Palace restaurant where he had responded to the assault call that fateful Friday evening. The young officer cleared his throat, nervously aware that Harrison Whitmore's legal team had already tried to pressure him into downplaying his testimony. The courtroom lights dimmed as the first video began to play, showing the restaurant's busy dinner service. Ming Liu could be seen efficiently moving between tables, her smile genuine despite the exhaustion evident in her movements. The timestamp showed 8:47 p.m. when Victoria and her group of equally well-dressed friends sauntered in without a reservation, demanding the best table in the house, which was clearly occupied by an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. Victoria watched the footage with an expression of pure boredom, occasionally typing out text messages that made her snicker. Her attorney, Benjamin Sterling Gill, kept nudging her to pay attention, but she simply rolled her eyes and whispered loud enough for the jury to hear, like, "OMG, who even eats at places like this anyway? Probably got food poisoning from all that weird stuff they serve." The casual racism in her tone made several jurors shift uncomfortably in their seats. The next segment of footage showed Ming Liu politely explaining the wait time to Victoria's group, but the socialite could be seen becoming increasingly agitated, her designer purse swinging dangerously close to the server's face as she gestured dramatically. Victoria took this moment in the present to stand up and announce to the courtroom that her Hermes bag was actually the limited edition one, and she would never risk damaging it by hitting someone with it. Judge Chen rapped his gavel sharply, but Victoria merely shrugged and returned to her phone. The devastating moment played out on screen in silent horror, Ming Liu approaching Victoria's table with their appetizers only to be met with a stream of racial slurs that the security footage captured with crystal clear audio. Several members of the jury visibly recoiled as Victoria's voice shrieked about going back where you came from, while Ming Liu stood frozen soup tureen still in her trembling hands. Harrison Whitmore watched the scene unfold, his face growing paler by the second as his daughter's voice continued its tirade on screen. "If you can't speak proper English, you shouldn't be allowed to work here. This is America, not some communist backwater." The present day Victoria seemed completely unfazed by her recorded behavior, instead choosing this moment to take another selfie, complete with a mock surprised expression. The footage reached its climax as Victoria grabbed the steaming soup tureen from Ming Liu's hands and deliberately poured it over the young server's face and chest, the screams from the video making several spectators in the courtroom cover their ears. Ming Liu, who sat in the back row, unconsciously touched the faint scars on her neck, where Victoria could be heard laughing on screen and asking if that was hot enough for her takeout order. Ada Martinez paused the footage just as Victoria could be seen attempting to flee the restaurant, her friends already scattered to their luxury vehicles outside. She turned to face Judge Chen, her expression grave as she prepared to call her first witness, but Victoria interrupted the proceedings by standing up and declaring, "This is such a waste of time, Daddy. Just write her a check or whatever, like peasants love money, right?" The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers, while Judge Chen leaned forward, his patience visibly wearing thin. Judge Marcus Chen removed his glasses with deliberate precision, using the moment to gather his thoughts as the young woman before him continued her social media updates, completely oblivious to the gravity of her situation. In his 4 decades on the bench, he had seen his fair share of entitled defendants, but something about Victoria Whitmore's casual disdain for the proceedings struck a deeper chord. Perhaps it was the way her actions mirrored the discrimination his own parents had faced decades ago when they first arrived in America with nothing but dreams and determination. Victoria stretched in her chair like a bored cat, her designer suit rustling with the movement as she turned to her attorney and stage whispered in a voice clearly meant to carry across the courtroom, "How much longer do I have to sit here with these people? I can literally feel my net worth dropping just breathing the same air." The gallery erupted in muffled gasps, while Benjamin Sterling Gill clutched his leather briefcase so hard his knuckles turned white, knowing his career might not survive this day. The judge cleared his throat, causing Victoria to roll her eyes skyward, catching a glimpse of the ornate ceiling frescoes that her great-grandfather had donated to the courthouse back when the Whitmore family was trying to buy respectability among the city's elite. Well, if it is another immigrant trying to play pretend judge," she drawled, examining her perfect manicure with theatrical disinterest. Her father, Harrison, shot to his feet in horror, where the court reporter stopped typing, seemingly frozen in disbelief. Judge Chen leaned forward slightly, the fluorescent lights catching the silver in his hair as he addressed the defendant. Annis Whitmore, since you seem so interested in my background, perhaps you'd like to hear how my father survived the Communist Revolution, escaped a concentration camp, and came to America with $5 in his pocket. The young socialite, however, was already crafting a tweet about how Judge, whatever his name is, was totally trying to make her feel guilty with his sob story. #bored, #can't even. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees as Victoria stood up, without being called, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached the bench, uninvited. "Oh my God," she exclaimed with exaggerated patience, "like I literally can't with this whole poor immigrant story. Like, hello, my family built this courthouse. We probably pay your salary." Ming Liu watched from the gallery as tears rolled down her cheeks, while several jurors scribbled furious notes. Victoria pulled out her phone and began recording herself speaking in a mockingly exaggerated Asian accent that made even her own attorney wince, addressing her growing Instagram Live audience as she performed an offensive bow towards the bench. "This is me getting totally lectured by some justice warrior judge," she narrated to her phone. "Daddy will probably just buy the courthouse and fire him tomorrow, right, Daddy?" Harrison Whitmore had sunk so low in his seat he was practically under the bench, his face ashen as he watched years of carefully cultivated political connections crumbling before his eyes. The court officers moved to confiscate Victoria's phone, but she danced away with practiced ease, continuing her social media broadcast while Judge Chen sat in absolute stillness, his expression unreadable, but his eyes following her every move like a chess master watching an opponent dig their own grave. The young woman seemed to feed off the tension in the room, growing more animated as she continued her performance for her online audience, completely missing the subtle nod Judge Chen gave to the court officers. Benjamin Sterling Lee made one last desperate attempt to control his client. "Your Honor, I request a brief recess to confer with my..." But Victoria cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Save it, Benny," she sneered, addressing her phone camera. "Again, see, this is what happens when we let everyone into law schools these days. Like, don't they have their own countries to practice law in?" The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Judge Chen slowly rose to his full height, his robes settling around him like gathering storm clouds. The weight of 40 years on the bench seemed to settle around Judge Marcus Chen like a mantle of authority as he rose, his weathered hands placed flat against the polished wood of his bench. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall courthouse windows cast his shadow long across the courtroom floor, reaching almost to where Victoria stood, still clutching her phone like a shield. The social media influencer finally faltered in her performance as she noticed the absolute stillness that had fallen over the gallery. Even the most seasoned court reporters had stopped typing, their fingers hovering over keyboards as they waited for what would come next. "Annis Whitmore," Judge Chen began, his voice carrying the quiet power of someone who had never needed to shout to command attention, "you seem to be under several misconceptions about this courtroom and its purpose." Victoria opened her mouth to interrupt, but something in the judge's steady gaze made her uncharacteristically hesitate, her phone dropping slightly as her live stream audience waited in digital suspense. "First," he continued, "you appear to believe that wealth equals worth, that money somehow transforms arrogance into authority." The older judge stepped down from his bench, each movement deliberate as he approached the space where Victoria stood. "Your great-grandfather James Whitmore the first did indeed help build this courthouse," Judge Chen spoke while gesturing to the ornate ceiling, "but not in the way you imagine, Victoria. He was a bricklayer, an immigrant from Ireland, who worked alongside my own father, laying the very foundation beneath your designer shoes." The color drained from Victoria's face as whispers rippled through the courtroom. Her father Harrison shifted uncomfortably, knowing this piece of family history had been carefully buried beneath generations of carefully constructed social status. The judge continued to close the distance between them, his voice taking on a tone of genuine curiosity. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what do you actually know about your family's history, about the great-grandfather whose name you invoke?" So casually, Victoria stammered, for perhaps the first time in her life, Daddy, she called out weakly. But Harrison Whitmore remained frozen in his seat as Judge Chen pressed on. Your great grandfather and my father shared lunch on these construction sites every day for 3 years. They broke bread together and shared stories of the homes they left behind, struggling together to build something greater than themselves. Victoria took an unsteady step backward, her phone, now forgotten, at her side as Judge Chen gestured to the magnificent courtroom around them. They built this hall of justice brick by brick, not with checkbooks and not with contempt, but with the hope that their children and their children's children would find equal justice within these walls. The young woman glanced desperately around the courtroom, but found no allies. Even her expensive attorney seemed captivated by the judge's words. Your great grandfather, Judge Chen continued, would be ashamed to see how you've twisted his legacy into a weapon of prejudice, the very prejudice he himself faced when signs reading "No Irish Need Apply" hung in every window. Victoria tried to summon her usual bravado, but her voice came out as a whisper when she spoke. You can't talk to me like this. Do you know who I am? The judge smiled, a gesture containing both sadness and determination. I know exactly who you are, Miss Whitmore. The question is, do you? The gallery watched in absolute silence as Judge Chen returned to his bench, his robes swirling with quiet dignity. As he settled back into his chair, Victoria remained standing in the center of the courtroom, her usual poise shattered as she confronted, perhaps for the first time in her life, the weight of her own ignorance. Her phone slipped from her manicured fingers, clattering against the marble floor as Judge Chen delivered his final observation. Your great grandfather and my father built these walls, Anne Whitmore, but character, that is something each of us must build for ourselves. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Victoria Whitmore struggled to regain her composure, her carefully constructed world of privilege cracking like thin ice beneath her feet. But years of entitlement had taught her only one response: to challenge. Double down. The young socialite straightened her designer jacket and forced her signature smirk back onto her face, her eyes darting around the courtroom like a cornered animal searching for escape. Whatever, she sneered, her voice carrying a slight tremor that betrayed her uncertainty. So my great grandpa was poor and did manual labor like them. She gestured dismissively toward Ming Liu and the other spectators in the gallery. But guess what? We evolved. While you people stayed exactly where you belong. Victoria turned to face her audience like a performer on stage, playing to the crowd. My family worked hard to get where we are now. We deserve our status, while others just want handouts and special treatment. Judge Chen watched silently as Victoria began to pace the courtroom floor, her Louboutin heels striking the marble with increasing force. As her voice grew more shrill and desperate, you want to talk about immigration? She challenged, pointing an accusing finger at Ming Liu. At least my ancestors came here legally. They learned English, they assimilated, they didn't try to turn America into whatever backward place they came from. Harrison Whitmore attempted to stand, but Victoria shot him a venomous glare that pushed him back into his seat. The young woman spun back toward Judge Chen, her blonde hair whipping around like a golden tornado. And you, she spat out the word like poison. You're supposed to be neutral, but here you are giving us diversity lectures and social justice speeches. In what even is this accent anyway? Several gasps echoed through the courtroom as Victoria affected an exaggerated Asian accent, mocking the judge's perfectly standard English pronunciation. Benjamin Sterling Lee began stuffing papers into his briefcase, clearly preparing for the imminent implosion of his career. Victoria stalked toward the bench, her designer purse swinging wildly as she gesticulated. My daddy sits on the board of Harvard Law. You know, she announced with triumphant venom. One phone call from him, and your precious alma mater will probably take back your degree, seeing as how you obviously only got in through affirmative action anyway. The courtroom temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees as Judge Chen slowly removed his glasses and placed them on the bench with surgical precision. Oblivious to the danger signals, Victoria pressed on, switching to an even more offensive accent as she performed an exaggerated bow. Me, so sorry, Your Honor, me just simple immigrant trying to play judge with real American citizens. The gallery erupted in shocked murmurs. but she raised her voice to speak over them. Guess what? She practically shouted, "My family doesn't just donate to this courthouse anymore. We basically own half this city. One call to the governor, and you'll be back working in a restaurant with her." She jabbed a finger toward Ming Liu, who sat quietly, tears streaming down her face. Judge Chen remained eerily still as Victoria continued her performance, adding theatrical gestures to her racist caricature. "Me want to sentence rich girl, but me need to go deliver takeout first," she sing-songed while making childish pulling motions at her eyes. Harrison Whitmore finally found his voice. "Victoria, enough," he bellowed, but his daughter was too far gone, drunk on her own desperate bid for control. The young socialite pulled out her backup phone, which she'd concealed in her jacket, and began streaming again to her followers. "Hey besties," she chirped between offensive impressions of the judge. "Watch me take down this social justice warrior who's trying to cancel me for speaking my truth, like literally attacking me for being a proud American citizen who just wants to make America great again." Benjamin Sterling Du finally broke, dropping his briefcase with a loud thud. As he approached the bench, "Your Honor," he stammered, "I wish to withdraw as counsel." A heavy silence fell over Courtroom 7, like the calm before a storm, as Judge Marcus Chen rose from his chair, his dark robes seeming to absorb all the light in the room. Victoria stood frozen in mid-gesture, her backup phone still broadcasting live to thousands of followers. As she finally registered the shifting atmosphere, even the most jaded court officers straightened their postures, sensing the historic moment about to unfold. As Whitmore, Judge Chen began, his voice carrying the weight of generations, the authority in his tone slicing through Victoria's remaining bravado like a knife through silk. "In my 40 years on this bench, I have seen every manner of criminal, every shade of defiance, every degree of disrespect." His eyes locked with hers, and for the first time that day Victoria felt a tremor of genuine fear. "But never," he continued, "have I witnessed such a profound display of ignorance and entitlement combined with such willful and malicious racism." Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but Judge Chen raised his hand, the gesture somehow commanding complete silence. "In my chambers," he continued, "I have a photograph hanging on the wall. It shows two men sharing a meal on the unfinished steps of this very courthouse, your great-grandfather and my father breaking bread together, finding common ground in their shared dreams for their children. One of those men would be ashamed today, and I don't believe it would be my father." Victoria swayed slightly on her feet as the judge's words struck home. "The charges before this court were simple assault and battery," Judge Chen stated, his voice growing colder with each word. "But you, as Whitmore, have transformed this proceeding into a showcase of the very prejudice and discrimination that this institution was built to combat. You have demonstrated not only a complete lack of remorse for your attack on Ms. Liu, but have chosen to compound that crime with contempt of court, racial harassment, and the kind of blatant bigotry that would make your immigrant ancestors weep." The young socialite stumbled backward, her phone's live stream forgotten, as Judge Chen descended from the bench, approaching her with measured steps. "Before this proceeding began, I had considered accepting the plea deal your attorney proposed," he revealed, "community service, a fine, and anger management classes. But you, Ms. Whitmore, have made it abundantly clear that such lenient measures would serve only to reinforce your sense of immunity from consequences." Victoria turned desperately to her father, but Harrison Whitmore sat with his head bowed, unable to meet his daughter's eyes. As Judge Chen continued, "You seem to believe, Ms. Whitmore, that wealth equals worth, that money can purchase impunity, that your family's success somehow elevates you above the fundamental principles of human dignity and respect." The judge paused, allowing his words to echo through the silent courtroom. "You are about to learn otherwise." With devastating calm, Judge Chen returned to his bench and delivered his ruling. "Victoria Whitmore, you are hereby found in contempt of court and sentenced to 60 days in county jail, to be served immediately." The color drained from Victoria's face as two court officers approached with handcuffs. "Furthermore, you will serve 2 years probation, complete 3,000 hours of community service at Asian American community centers, undergo mandatory diversity and sensitivity training, and pay a fine of $500,000 to be divided among organizations supporting victims of hate crimes. The distinct click of handcuffs closing around Victoria's wrists seemed to echo through the courthouse as Judge Chen delivered his final pronouncement, and as Whitmore, he added as she stood shell-shocked between the court officers, "Your great-grandfather earned his place in society through hard work, dignity, and respect for others, qualities you would do well to learn during your time in custody. Perhaps 60 days without privilege will teach what years of indulgence could not." Victoria finally broke down in tears as her phone clattered to the floor, ending her live stream with a view of her designer heels being replaced by standard issue jail slippers. Chaos erupted in the courtroom as Victoria Whitmore's reality came crashing down around her. The pristine Alexander McQueen suit she had chosen so carefully that morning now rumpled between the court officers' firm grip, her mascara leaving black trails down her cheeks as she thrashed against the handcuffs. "Daddy," she screamed, her voice cracking with genuine fear. For the first time in her privileged life, do something, call someone, anyone. Harrison Whitmore surged to his feet, his face purple with a combination of rage and panic. "Your Honor," he thundered, pulling out his phone, "do you know who I am? I have the governor on speed dial. This is an outrage. I demand you reconsider." Judge Chen nearly raised an eyebrow as he added another observation to his ruling. "Speaking of phones," he noted, "all recordings of this proceeding, including Ms. Whitmore's inflammatory social media broadcasts, will be submitted to the State Bar Association and the Board of Trustees at Harvard Law for review." The young socialite sagged between the court officers as reality began to sink in. Her carefully curated social media empire imploding in real time as her final live stream went viral for all the wrong reasons. Across the courtroom, Ming Liu sat quietly watching the scene unfold, her burned hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her sat her elderly grandmother, who had encouraged her to press charges despite the Whitmore family's attempts at intimidation. The older woman nodded slowly in satisfaction as she witnessed karma unfold. Victoria struggled harder as the court officers began leading her toward the side door that would take her to the holding cells. "Wait," she shrieked, "you can't do this to me. I have rights, I have appointments, I have a charity gala tonight." Benjamin Sterling Dealey, who had remained frozen since withdrawing as counsel, finally found his voice. "Actually, as Whitmore," he corrected, unable to resist one final jab, "you had those things past tense." The young woman shot him a look of pure venom before turning back to her father in desperation. Harrison Whitmore was already on his phone barking orders at his team of lawyers, but Judge Chen interrupted him smoothly. "Mr. Whitmore, before you waste your considerable resources on appeals, I should mention that every second of your daughter's performance has been captured by our courtroom cameras. Her conduct and subsequent sentencing will be upheld in any court in this country." The CEO deflated visibly as he realized the full implications of his daughter's actions. As Victoria was led past the gallery, she locked eyes with Ming Liu, the young waitress whose life she had so casually attempted to destroy. Something shifted in Victoria's expression as she saw not satisfaction or triumph in her victim's eyes, but simple, quiet dignity, the same quality she had witnessed in Judge Chen, the same character her great-grandfather had apparently embodied before generations of wealth had corrupted his legacy. "Wait," Victoria called out, suddenly her voice smaller than anyone had ever heard it. The court officers paused as Victoria turned toward Ming Liu. She began, then stopped, struggling to form words that had never been part of her vocabulary. "I am," the young socialite choked on the unfamiliar taste of humility. But before she could continue, Judge Chen interjected. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his tone gentler than before, "genuine remorse is shown through actions, not words. You will have 60 days to reflect on your choices and 3,000 hours of community service to demonstrate any sincere change of heart." Victoria nodded numbly as she was led away. The last thing she saw before the holding cell door closed was her father slumped in his seat, his empire crumbling around him as reporters rushed from the courtroom, already spreading the story of how justice had finally caught up with the Whitmore family legacy. Harrison Whitmore's phone buzzed continuously as board members, shareholders, and social connections began distancing themselves from the toxic fallout of his daughter's spectacular downfall. Judge Marcus Chen sat alone in his chambers that evening, the city's lights twinkling through his window like distant stars. As he reviewed the day's events, on his desk lay an old photograph, yellowed with age, showing two young men sharing a simple meal on the unfinished courthouse steps. James Whitmore the first and Chen Wei-ming, their work-worn hands breaking bread together, their dreams of a better future for their children still pure and uncorrupted by wealth and privilege. The judge's contemplation was interrupted by a knock at his door, revealing his clerk Jessica bearing a stack of newspapers, hot off the press. Whitmore, heiress behind bars, screamed the headlines. Racist rant leads to empire's collapse. Social media princess gets royal comeuppance. The stories had already gone viral, spreading across the internet faster than even Victoria's own social media posts ever had. Several major networks were running special reports on the Whitmore family's history, carefully uncovering generations of buried secrets and questionable business practices. Meanwhile, in the county jail, Victoria Whitmore sat on a thin mattress, her designer outfit replaced by an orange jumpsuit, her perfectly manicured nails already chipping as she stared at the concrete walls. Her cellmate, a middle-aged woman serving 30 days for unpaid parking tickets, ignored the socialite's quiet sobs, having watched the viral videos of her courtroom performance with the other inmates during yard time. The isolation of being just another number in the system beginning to crack Victoria's carefully constructed facade of superiority. Across town, in the gleaming Whitmore Industries headquarters, Harrison Whitmore faced an emergency board meeting via video conference, his usual commanding presence diminished by the day's events. Sir, the CFO spoke with careful precision, we've lost 30% of our market value since the videos went viral. Major clients are terminating contracts, and our Asian market partnerships are dissolving by the hour. Harrison watched helplessly as decades of business relationships crumbled under the weight of his daughter's racism. In a small apartment across the city, Ming Liu sat with her grandmother, drinking tea from cups that had survived their family's escape from political persecution decades ago. Watching the news coverage with mixed emotions, she touched the healing burns on her neck as her grandmother spoke softly in Mandarin about karma and justice, explaining how the universe has its own way of balancing the scales. Ming thought about Victoria's final expression in the courtroom, that moment of dawning recognition that had flickered across her face before the holding cell door closed. Back in his chambers, Judge Chen received another visitor, Ada Sarah Martinez, who carried a thick file. Your Honor, she began, the Whitmore case has opened a floodgate. We've received dozens of calls since this afternoon, other victims of similar incidents who were too afraid to come forward before they saw what happened today. The judge nodded, remembering his own parents' silence in the face of discrimination decades ago. Sometimes, he reflected, it takes one moment of justice to inspire 1,000 voices. The evening news continued to broadcast footage from the courtroom, focusing on the moment Victoria had mockingly bowed before Judge Chen's. Social media experts analyzed how the former influencer had essentially broadcasted her own downfall to millions of followers, her sponsored contracts and brand deals vanishing one by one as companies rushed to distance themselves from the toxic association. Harrison Whitmore's phone had finally stopped ringing as even his closest allies recognized the wisdom of maintaining their distance. In the courthouse parking lot, Benjamin Sterling I. packed up his office, having decided to retire early rather than weather the storm of association with the Whitmore case. As he carried his box of belongings to his car, he passed the construction wing where a crew was carefully restoring the original cornerstone of the building, revealing the names of the original workers, including James Whitmore and Chen Wei-ming, their signatures preserved in stone, a testament to the true foundation of justice. Judge Chen finally prepared to leave for the evening, carefully returning the old photograph to its place on his wall. As he gathered his robes, he noticed a small group of young law students gathered at the courtroom public gallery, some of Asian descent, studying the space with newfound confidence. Tomorrow, he thought, would bring new challenges, new cases, new chances to balance the scales, but tonight justice had been served in a way that would ripple through generations. just as the actions of two immigrant workers sharing lunch had rippled through time to shape this very moment. 1 year later, the same courtroom that had witnessed Victoria Whitmore's spectacular downfall hosted a very different scene. The young woman stood before Judge Chen again, but this time her designer outfit had been replaced by a modest business suit. Her once perfectly styled hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her expression carrying the weight of lessons learned through 60 days of incarceration and countless hours of community service. Your Honor, Victoria, began, her voice steady but humbled, I stand before you today not to make excuses for my past actions, but to share the impact of your sentence. She gestured to the gallery where dozens of faces watched intently, including Ming Liu, who sat beside her grandmother in the front row. During my time at the Asian American Community Center, I learned more than just cultural sensitivity. I learned about my own family's true history. The young woman pulled out a worn photograph similar to the one hanging in Judge Chen's chambers, showing James Whitmore and Chen Wei-ming sharing their lunch. I found this in my great-grandfather's diary, she continued, which I discovered in our attic while cleaning it out after my father sold our mansion. The diary entries spoke of his friendship with your father, their shared dreams for their children, and his shame at how future generations might forget the value of hard work and human dignity. Throughout the courtroom sat representatives from various community organizations where Victoria had completed her service hours, each one prepared to testify about her transformation. The director of the Asian American Community Center nodded encouragingly as Victoria continued speaking. My great-grandfather wrote about how wealth should be a tool for lifting others up, not a weapon to push them down. She paused, touching the simple pendant at her neck, a gift from Ming Liu's grandmother, who had become an unexpected mentor. Harrison Whitmore watched from the back row, a changed man himself, after losing control of his company to a coalition of investors led surprisingly by Ming Liu's family investment group, which had transformed Whitmore Industries into a leader in corporate responsibility and diversity initiatives. The irony of karma had not been lost on anyone, especially when they appointed Judge Chen to their board of ethics. Victoria turned to face Ming Liu directly. The burns on the young doctor's neck now faded, but the memory of that day still clear. I can't undo my actions, she acknowledged, but I can dedicate my life to ensuring no one else faces the discrimination and hatred I once embodied. She gestured to the group of young students seated nearby, introducing her new foundation dedicated to providing scholarships to children of immigrant families. Judge Chen listened intently as Victoria outlined her foundation's first year of achievements, including funding anti-racism education programs, establishing cultural exchange initiatives, and creating employment opportunities for recent immigrants. The same security cameras that had captured her disgrace now recorded her redemption, broadcasting this moment to a new audience who had followed her journey from social media princess to advocate for social justice. The most profound change, Ming Liu observed, was not in Victoria's words, but in her eyes. Gone was the entitled arrogance, replaced by something her great-grandfather would have recognized: genuine humility and determination to make amends. The young doctor had agreed to serve on the foundation's medical advisory board, helping to establish clinics in underserved communities, a partnership that would have seemed impossible a year ago. As Victoria concluded her presentation, Judge Chen removed his glasses in a gesture that once triggered fear but now carried a different weight. Ms. Whitmore, he began, your journey reminds us that true justice is not about punishment but transformation. You have honored not only this court's sentence but your own heritage, the legacy of two men who shared a vision of unity. Despite their differences, Victoria felt tears welling up as the judge smiled for the first time in her presence. The afternoon sun streamed through the courthouse windows, illuminating the restored cornerstone where James Whitmore and Chen Wei-ming's names remained eternally linked, a testament to the foundations of justice, both literal and metaphorical, that supported the weight of progress and change. Victoria stood taller as Judge Chen officially cleared her record, knowing that while her legal debt had been paid, her commitment to making amends would last a lifetime. Ming Liu approached, offering a quiet gesture of peace as cameras flashed, capturing the moment when justice had come full circle, healing wounds that went beyond skin deep and transforming lives in ways no one could have predicted.